Nicetti. You're watching PaxAid Live.
Core values are not aspirational. Core values is who your company is.
Always be in a hiring process for when the right person comes along. And nearly every single time, the business has shown up because the right person was already there.
The best things that I am highly encouraging of is having an MSA with very clear language in terms of where your liability lies. Take an opportunity in these quarterlies to say, gosh, if we did everything right, what does a quarter from now look like?
Hey everybody, welcome to Technically Unraveled. Thank you for taking the time today. It's good to see you. We've got a ton of things coming to you here soon, so you don't want to miss out. There's a couple things that are new that I really wanted to just kind of pick your brain on. They're worried about the risks. What are they taking on? We have so much fun doing this show.
My wife and I actually won a dance contest.
We've got to have a dance-off on PaxAid Live. I think that's what we need to get going.
Digital transformations are changing our view of what's possible, what we can accomplish, and how far we can go. In the PaxAid marketplace of the future, AI helps illuminate new opportunities, and your whole portfolio is within reach. You can go to market faster, work more efficiently, and accelerate your success, all with an intuitive interface designed to scale as you scale. Infinite growth is possible in the new PaxAid marketplace.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday and welcome to the game on PaxAid Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We have a really great show. We're going to talk about email security today, which at first glance sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but we think we can pull it off. So we're going to discuss that with Nathan Taylor here in a bit. But first, let's bring on Matt and get the show kicked off. What's happening?
From my first Juno account, email's been secure, bro. Like, then Prodigy, like, what are you talking about? It's super secure. Yeah. No, I digress. No, I'm super stoked about this for two reasons, right? Nathan Taylor kind of got gypped, right? We did our first show with Nathan Taylor. Nobody knows this, but our first show, like 80 episodes ago by. But by the way, I wouldn't look back. We're like 80 episodes in.
Damn.
And so when we went back that far, Nathan did one, and it was so bad it wound up on the cutting room floor, right, Dom? Is that the main
yeah,
reason?
I think that's what happened. Yeah.
Oh, that's not the reason. No, I tease. No, man, seriously though, Nathan came on and did a trial run with us. We didn't know it was a beta, so we didn't even tell him, right? And so it never made it to air. And now here we get to come full circle and bring Nathan in for what I think he's actually probably the best at, even as good as that first show was, which is demonstrating and explaining technical content that is sometimes hard for people to grasp. So, today, Dom, we want to make this about one play, right? One big thing, one play. And what is that today, Dom? What are we talking
about? Get a grip on your email security, I think is it, and also understand how it's evolving.
Yeah.
It's still one play.
Both concepts.
The word and.
And sure. So, but still, no, it's one. It's conjunctive. You're good. I watched
Conjunction
Junction. So,
sense.
yeah, we're 100% fine. Yeah. No, I also want to add that for me, it's about hygiene, right? There was the general that spoke at the MIT commencement and said, make your bed every day, right? And he goes on and on. And if everybody's watched that, if they haven't watched it, go watch it. But my point is that in cybersecurity is a lot about hygiene. And when I'm first looking at someone, I'm going to go look at their hygienic attempts that are public facing that they don't know I've got the rifle aimed at them, right? I'm going to do it all passively. And these are things I can gather quite passively about you that tell me whether you've taken care of those hygienic things. And so I think my one play today is don't show the attacker you don't make your bed, right? Do those things that are public, one of them being DNS, one of them being email, both being conjunctive, using your and to what we're trying to talk about today. But before that, and after the 100,000 words a second, their diatribe, I think it's time to hear from the brilliant Robin Harris. Don't miss the link she actually has as well for some actual value you can just take home right now from her statement. It's amazing. So let's go.
Are you ready?
I'd like to talk to you today about playbooks. Now, everybody's heard of workbooks, but we don't want to do workbooks. We want to do playbooks. And I'll tell you my introduction to playbooks. At a Thanksgiving dinner, sitting at the kitchen table with my nephews, and they were trying to explain football to me. They were drawing X's and O's on napkins and trying to show me how different plays work. And yeah, that didn't work out so well. But what I did come to realize is I love playbooks. I absolutely love them. I use them personally. I use them at work. And I think they are a phenomenal communication tool. And you want to start a playbook with understanding what is your objective. What is it I'm trying to accomplish here? Why am I trying to accomplish it? And what does winning mean? What is it that I'm going to use to measure if I'm successful? What am I expecting to gain from this? And if you don't have an answer, then you're not ready to take this on. I know everybody's excited about AI and the new technologies, and they want to just jump in, but they haven't taken the time to clarify what's their objective and how do they know they're winning at the game, right? So the playbook is going to help because it actually helps people understand what the game is. Because the last thing you want to have happen is the equivalent of part of your team's playing baseball, but the other part of your team thinks the game is basketball. I know that sounds silly, but we just don't think about the ramifications of, are we all in the same game? Are we all going towards the same goal? So the playbook is a tool for guiding your efforts. It's procedural, it's prescriptive. It's going to help you identify those foundation pieces that you need to have in place. It's going to be time boxed. You're not doing a playbook for the whole season, right? It's not the whole season. It's one game. So you want this very time boxed, very narrow focus that this playbook is going to cover. Maybe it's just the quarter. I love quarterly playbooks. You know, that's going to get you to the end of the year. It's going to get you to some very specific end goal. But there's really an opportunity to take some things off our scope, take some things off the table, because there's a tendency for people to try to do too many different things at the same time. And what a playbook will help you do is narrow your focus, narrow your scope, define what winning really is, how you're going to get there, and how you're going to measure how well you did. And at the end, what you want to do is you want to look back and say, how well did we play that game and what can we do better next time? And to help you with this idea of a playbook, we're going to give you a little template. It's a template, it's generic. Take it, customize it, and make it work for you.
Level up. Level up.
All right.
More brilliant words from Robin, and I did check out that template. It's a great template. You should definitely start with it. So down there, it's a domk.pro link. It's legit for now. So click it while it's safe. Let's not waste any more time. Let's pull in Nathan.
Let's do it. We don't even need anything else. Let's do it. What's up, brother?
How's it going, guys?
Good. I guess you wound up top of the pyramid here, which is actually appropriate since you'll be demonstrating most of today's content. So welcome to the show, man. Twice.
Appreciate you having me. It's always fun.
How do we want to kick this off, Nathan? I'm going to let you be the host since you're up on the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you want to just jump in? I mean, as Dom alluded to earlier, this is like basic stuff in some ways where it's like we've all played with this. We've all had to fix SPF and DKIM and email stuff. But I think getting into it and really digging into it has a lot of value, and it's evolving.
You know what? I did skip a step, Nathan. before we go, for everybody out there watching, why don't you introduce yourself, since they didn't get to see that first show we alluded to, and tell everybody what you do and your background, man. Since you and I have known each other for 7-8 years, but let's start again. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks again for having me. I'm Nathan Taylor. I'm the Senior Director of Enterprise Solutions for SourcePass, which means I lead our pre-sales engineering team and a lot of our Microsoft practice, go-to-market sort of stuff. And I've been doing small and medium business IT for 20 years. So started as an engineer and kind of worked my way up the stack. So thanks for having me.
All right, awesome. Now back to the deck. I apologize, y'all. That's on me. Bad.
All right. Yeah, we're gonna dig through a bunch of acronym soup, right? If we had a swear jar for all the acronyms we're dropping today, we could go buy lunch. So lots of interesting stuff. But I think it's fun to kind of dig into. I think it can be intimidating, but we'll jump into it. And we got a bunch of dank memes. I've really tried to include a funny meme on every slide. So
every cybersecurity talk needs dank memes.
Yeah, it has to happen. It has to happen. It's
Absolutely.
always Peter, by the way. I'm sorry, that's not right.
Oh my goodness. So, I think most people know these main acronyms: SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and we'll break them down here. But it's always good when you get to drop the word conformance. That's a great word. I think that's a 2-quarter word right there. So,
sure.
Let's jump into what these are. So,
yeah, let's do it. That's what I was going to say. Go ahead. I'll tackle SPF if you don't mind, since that's the easy one.
Go for it.
I can tackle the hard stuff. So you produce a DNS record, to the point it's always DNS, even when it's not DNS. You produce a DNS record that you say, hey, publicly, this is who should be sending mail on my behalf, right? And this is kind of one of the earliest forms of how we would say what's supposed to send mail. And we're all familiar with this. This isn't too much of a rehash, or too much of something new for y'all. It should be a rehash. But basically, it's just a method saying I must have control of DNS. And if I have control of DNS, then everything I've listed here is stuff that I must have approved for us to send. So is that a fair way to describe SPF for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, it solves the original problem with SMTP, which was anybody could send anything. I mean, you could log into a server and say send as Nathan@cybermatlee.com and it'll go. The right email server misconfigured, it'll do it. It'll send it. But as we all know, emails become a real challenge. So much of our business runs there, but authenticating it has become a real concern, right? At least phishing emails. Yeah. And so this was the original attempt to say, this is an authoritative list of who can as my domain.
Well, if we just harken back for just a second and think about some maybe newer engineers who watched the show, let's go all the way back to how email works just really quick, because it's not complicated at all. Email is, I write a message, right? That message gets some headers attached to it, much like a TCP packet if you've studied that, and then it's got the body, and then I take that through a protocol called SMTP, and I throw it out into the internet, right? And then my email server figures out where it's going to go, but then it just tosses it out there. That's literally all that happens. So everything we've built on top of it since that is still on top of this idea of quite literally throwing what is basically a paper airplane across the internet and hoping it lands in the right spot. It's that's just, email is not a sophisticated thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And continue. Sorry, no authentication needed, right? Is the point. Or airplane skills.
Yeah, traditionally. So SPF is critical. We've got to be doing it. You're not going to get through most mail servers without an SPF record these days. They could be simple. A lot of them are going to look something like this, where you got 1 or 2 records. They don't have to be complex, and we'll go poke at some here.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we should actually speak to that's a problem with SPF, right? Which is that if you have a lot of records, you have a recursion limit. You can only look up so many recursive DNS queries in certain queries. There was a RFC recursion limit regarding to this. And the nature of it is that we use a lot of cloud services now, and we have a lot of people that have really trash infrastructure.
Yes.
Anyways, I digress.
By the way, without that recursive limit, because I was listening, I think it was a podcast about the origin of SPF, and the recursive limit came about because it was discovered that you could publish a huge SPF record can actually
Is it a
start to
denial
cause
of
a denial of
service?
service because it's looking up
of
so
course
many
you
damn
could.
host names.
Yeah, of course you could. That's why we can't have nice
you
things, Dom. That's why we can't have nice things.
But they thought
you're
like
not-
a
you're
hacker.
not
The
wrong,
recursive limit was
right?
in V1, so good on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is
Yeah.
that causes us to have to be inventive, and there's services that exist out there right now, right, that do that, like Valimail or Easy DMARC or all of the ones that are out there that play that game, that try to actually like help you flatten, either by once through IP address flattening or as a dynamic methodology in some form or fashion using RFC components in different versions. But the point is that the challenge can be that you can have a failure of your SPF record that causes you to have to make bad decisions to include mail that you would want to exclude just to overcome some of those failures as a practitioner, right? Gentlemen, is that a fair way to kind of say that? Okay, we've beat up on SPF.
Yeah, I think that's
enough.
fair. I think there's two concerns on SPF that you got to keep in mind. The most common mistake I see is people publish two. It's really easy to just add a second one. It's just a text record, and often when I see SPF issues, it's because they have two records. You can only have one, and it'll fail and break things if you have to.
True story.
The second thing I think is what you talked about earlier of like you could put anything in there. So traditionally, hey, you want to send email from your copier. All of a sudden you throw your public IP of your office in there so that Microsoft will let you send email from your copier directly. But I think we really
now
got to
I use a
reconsider
Wi-Fi
whether
Pineapple. I'm in your network. I can send an email. I can be Nathan, and I'm going to get those sweet, sweet gift cards that I need for him to get through his day, right? Like so. Yeah, and it makes it easy. That's what the problem with that is, right? So anyways, continue.
Yeah, and it's OSINT, right? You're telling people what your IPs are, you're giving them information, and it's time for us to move on from sending directly from copiers. If you want to do that, throw a solution like SendGrid out there and do it through a manner that supports 100%. These technologies, SPF and DKIM. We got to up our game. So next topic is DKIM, domain keys identified mail, and it's just a way to authenticate that email, that it's legitimately from you. It's a signed email. And I think this is one of the big keys. I'm surprised at how often when I get into customer environments, DKIM is not set up. Now, Microsoft didn't make it easier in previous iterations. They finally simplified it. You had to go dig for the key, but it's just 2 DNS records and you're done. But it makes a huge difference on the email flow. It's dramatic.
And we say it's just 2 records, but what's actually happening behind the scenes is on that second record there where it says selector1 _ domain secret squirrel.net, right, in this case. That second one that goes to the CNAME, that goes to the Microsoft, actually then returns a public key, right, that then says, hey, this is what you would expect to be able to validate that this key was, that this this message was signed with this private key, right? Is that a fair way to say it, Dom? Dom's more the expert on, on this statement.
We should differentiate real quick because there's things like SMIME that sign the actual email and the content.
Sure.
To typically a human, it could be a service, but so DKIM is signing the headers to state that this particular service, which is dictated by a selector, right, sent that email, and it's typically signing like the headers or a few headers. It very rarely signs the whole message just because it now has to hash the whole thing. So what, and there's a bit of a debate that we don't need to go into here, but generally speaking, it provides cryptographic proof that service or server that published that particular public key sent that email, right?
That's correct.
And it's a good call out.
It's valuable because of that. We still don't have any mechanism that we know
and
of.
And each service can have its own DKIM, right? So if you're using SendGrid, for example, to Nathan's point, it's going to have its things that it needs as its selectors and its capability of delivering that message, right? And so that's the point of how that structure works together to at least try to prove the authenticity of the sender, right? At least the originating service. Now, Nathan, there's challenges, and we see this with the way the key is applied sometimes, the way the header's treated as it goes through different hops, right? Do you want to speak towards some of that challenge with DKIM?
Yeah, there's a real big challenge when people are running mail filters in front of their Office 365, for example. You run your email through Proofpoint, and you have Proofpoint add a little disclaimer, say this email was scanned by Proofpoint, it's safe, right? Just kind of a standard config. Well, Office 365 sees an email that came from Proofpoint, and Proofpoint doesn't match the DKIM on the domain, right? Because that sender didn't have Proofpoint. And so it can cause some issues because the email server is literally, as Dom was referring to, saying, I got an email from this domain, does the signing on the header match the IP address I got from and when those things don't line up, it starts to get very very difficult, and especially when the email gets modified. All of a sudden the signature doesn't work, right? You added that disclaimer, now the signature definitely doesn't work. And so it can cause some weird issues, but I still think DKIM is a way better way to go for things like HubSpot. Send an email as HubSpot. HubSpot's
100%.
notorious about not honoring their own
100%.
SPF records. They are not going to pass SPF, but they will pass DKIM. They will sign every email. And so it can be a really key thing for getting important emails through in those scenarios.
Yeah, 100%. So we've talked about two of the components, at least at a cursory level, of what the next one that we need to talk about is, don't we?
Yes. And domain-based message authentication reporting and conformance, DMARC, is really just authoritative statement from the sender that says, this is how well I've dialed in my SPF and DKIM, is really what it is.
Yeah, but pause though. Let's take apart the pieces in this. We have domain-based message authentication, which means we are validating at least at a domain level through DNS yet again, right? We're gonna see this. That's what they're stating really as an extensibility of DMARC as a policy, and message authentication to try to say this came from here and here's the things you need to know to authenticate it vis-a-vis SPF or DKIM, right? And then reporting and conformance. And so the reporting aspect of that is actually a unparsed XML sent from the receivers of your mail, no matter whether you sent it or if a threat actor sent it from some pop-up airplane manufacturer, to Dom's point, right? So we now have a receiver sending this list of who sent messages to some recipient address, which means that's what's often ignored, in my opinion, in DMARC, is this parsing and reporting. And you alluded to this when we talked pre-show of what's being sent on my behalf. What's the threat surface look like? What are people sending? And so I just didn't want to lose that as we dig into DMARC, that its function is more than just what should be sent on my behalf as a better way of combining SPF and DMARC, or in DKIM, I'm sorry. It is actually a great way to get reports back and find that threat surface, send cease and desist where necessary, block where necessary, damage control where necessary. So I'm getting off on a tangent, but I just wanted to set that stage for DMARC as its capability, not what people think it is usually, in my opinion.
No, I think that's a great call out, and I have it here. User reporting tool. I think this is one of the keys. If you want to dial this in, go get a reporting tool. There's cheap ones. There's a lot of some services have them free. There's a lot of really great tools. We've talked about a couple already. Easy DMARC, Falamail, all these brands of companies that have come up. The reporting is really critical for dialing this in, because for larger orgs, not only do you want to know who's sending as me, whether legit or not, but sometimes you need to know that because you don't realize that the marketing department has a MailChimp and a SendGrid account. All of a sudden they're spinning up.
Why could that matter? It's not like PII. Yeah, none of that would ever. None of that matters. We don't need to know about that from a data security or information security perspective. Yeah, I digress.
So I think the big takeaway I want to throw here is that we're going to talk about it in a second. I'll show you some announcements, but Google's starting to enforce requirements for domains to have a DMARC record published. It can be set to none. In other words, I don't have an opinion on who's sending as me, but I at least have a record showing that you've put at least that level of input in. And I think it's really important that people start to realize you have to have at least a P equals none DMARC record today to start, or you're going to start having emails just not get through. We can get into details about how we can really customize a DMARC record, and I'll show you that in a second. But I think it's a great place to start.
And I want to reiterate something too, though, real quick, because Dom said in the very beginning about the paper airplane that you're just tossing and hope it gets there, right? Ultimately, you get some answer, but in between. So now you have this problem of you may not always get a deliverability report. You may not always get a response back. And so now you think you sent that important email to let somebody know you're coming home late, or let somebody know a big deal's about to close, and nothing happens. That is what will get you killed as an MSP faster than anything else. When you lose a deal, ask me how I know, by mismanaging email for someone and its deliverability, right? So I just wanted to make that point clear. Yeah.
Well, and as an MSP, you've got 17 services sending as you, your RMM sending alerts as you, your billing system sending emails as you. Like it can get out of hand. You need a reporting tool that will help you understand that, and then you've got to go navigate each one of those tools. Do they support DKIM? Do they have a published SPF record? Is it in my record? Do I want them sending email as me? Do I want to, that sort of thing. So there's some interesting things to navigate here.
Yeah. When I first went down this journey as a practitioner, and then I'll show you just a recent journey in the next slide. When I first went down this journey of trying to get DKIM keys everywhere, there was a real problem with ConnectWise and SMTP to go. The way the account was structured, they weren't able to take in individual SMTP to go keys. There were some challenges in that delivery, and this was many years ago, so they've gotten things squared away, I'm sure, by now. But the point was, those were challenges sometimes working with third-party vendors who had fourth-party contracts for me, right, to manage that access and requests early on. Is it better now, Nathan, from that regard? Most of those working environments working with getting DKIM keys managed and get to a P equals reject at some point?
Most vendors now are publishing DKIM keys because it is requirement, right? And I think as an MSP, you should really put some thought into, you want at least a P equals quarantine. You need to get your DMARC dialed in because, as you talked about, hey, if I can spoof you and pretend to be you as an MSP, the power I have being able to send an email as you is incredible. Hey, click on this link. Yeah. Hey, there's a critical update. So you really, as a service provider, need a DMARC that's authoritative because it allows your legitimate email to get through filters quicker because it checks a bunch of boxes. An illegitimate email gets rejected or quarantined, and that's critical in this world of phishing attacks left and right. And most of the vendors are starting to embrace that. They know they have to support the partners for that.
So I'll tell on myself in this next slide that I had been lazy about getting my DMARC dialed in because I don't send much email from my cybermattlee.com domain. So I'm using this to tell everybody that you can be just as bad as me and get it done today if you have not done it. But I used a platform, Easy DMARC is who I use for this particular purpose. And this is the series of test emails that I've done, right? So the first email was like straight up failed everything. And that's because I actually didn't have the SPF record published properly, kind of for illustrative purposes as well. But then next is partially failed. Why? Well, my DKIM wasn't signed. Also, it was because I was still waiting on Microsoft to allow me to flip the little switch. So I'd give this as a little pro tip. If you're ever doing this in Microsoft, once you publish the DNS records, go ahead and wait a little bit, just to make sure that DNS first check isn't going to fail. Because if it does, Microsoft will honor the TTL, right? The time to live. It will not check again until your stated TTL. And if that's 8 hours, you need to probably get a cup of coffee, or 12. And so I waited an extra 30 minutes today, got frustrated and said, this email test is going to be after Microsoft gets done writing this in stone or something to that effect. But I did get finally to where I'm fully able to be compliant. I only have one service sending as that mail domain, and I'm able to very quickly lock it down to P equals reject. And Nathan, what's the difference between P equals reject and P equals quarantine, just for people's basic knowledge, and P equals none?
You're telling the recipient server that if it does not pass SPF or DKIM or a combination, and you can dial some of that in, but if it fails DMARC, let's say it doesn't match SPF or DMARC and it's reject, that mail server is supposed to not accept the email. It's supposed to do an NDR, reject that email, and not accept it. Quarantine says, count this as spam. Let it come through, but throw it in the junk mail, put a flag on it, make sure everybody knows that this did not come through cleanly. And you can even get so subtle as to say, hey, quarantine 50% of emails that fail. If you're still rolling this out and you're trying to test this, you can really get granular in how hard you enforce DMARC. Which I think is a great thing to start playing with. If you're trying to learn this, go play with some of those settings. And, it's not a real black and white thing. It can be really subtle in how you deploy it.
Yep, absolutely. So there was my little journey this morning. It took me less than an hour of total work, I think, to get that done, right? Just for everybody's knowledge. So,
nice.
All right. Most of that was
one note of importance is there's one vendor who does not provide DMARC reporting, because this is DMARC reporting is done by the receiving server, and there's one major mail service that will not send DMARC reporting, and that is Office 365. So when you're looking at your reporting, you might have to give it time, and if you don't send it any non-Office 365 recipients, your DMARC is going to populate slowly. And I don't know why Microsoft doesn't play along, but they don't. So it's just something important to keep in mind.
That's fair.
So let's go jump in and look at some portals, because I think there's some value in kind of talking about what this looks like. So it didn't used to be this easy, but when you're in your tenant, this is my demo tenant here, my super secret squirrel tenant. When you go to manage your DNS, Microsoft publishes all these records. The first one that's critical, they give you your SPF record. It's pre-built here. Now you may need to add some things to that. You know,
I was going to say that can be a trap, can't it, Nathan? Yeah.
It can be.
It's a trap.
Yeah, because that right there is only going to say right now that it's pretty authoritative, that only email is coming from Office 365. So when you're setting up a new tenant, you need to make sure you've thought through all the places you're getting email sent, but you at least hit the beginnings of a record here.
Yep.
And actually, these records are going to change as well. We'll talk about this in a later section. This email, this record's going to change.
Too.
So,
Nathan, an additional call out on that first statement with that V equals SPF include. You might have additional includes, you might additional IPs. When you get to that point, and if you do publish that deltaed record, what happens in Microsoft right here, Nathan? What happens when you publish a deltaed record from what they've given you?
Their checker is smart enough to just look for the include protection.outlook.com.
They fixed
so they'll
that
see
now?
the other stuff.
Okay.
They have fixed it. It's generally pretty good about not flagging it. If it's got
I'm just showing
additional
how old
details.
I am then. Yeah, it used to just give you a flag and you had to bypass it and say, okay, fine, I'm cool with this. Okay, good. They fixed it. Sorry, Microsoft. I take back one negative map point. Yeah.
So they added these now to the DNS site. You used to have to go dig for these, the DKIM keys for your Office 365 email. They'll now just not only publish them here so you know what to deploy, but if you're using a service like Cloudflare or GoDaddy that Microsoft can natively integrate with, they'll actually push all the records for you. So it can be really helpful to get DKIM going. You need to go do this for all your email domains and all your customer email domains.
A side note from your point. A side note from your point on the actual management there. If you go build those yourself in Cloudflare, make sure you don't proxy those things that go to Microsoft, right? When you natively do it through the app or the integration, it does that for you. But if you're having to add that manually for some reason, make sure you do not proxy that. So just a side pro tip. Again, of those ask me how
Great
I
call
knows.
out.
So
we've also got in the Defender portal, there's an email authentication section. We'll get to trusted ARC sealers in a little bit, but this is where you can see the status of your DKIM. So in this case, I have the DKIM records published and it's enabled. So it is signing all email coming through here for me. I even have ability to rotate keys if you had some reason you were concerned about keys, that sort of thing. But generally, you don't have to manage this. Once it's enabled, you check the box, you hit it to enabled, and you're done. So, and then those records look, they just show up as records in your DNS here, right? You've got your SPF record, your text record, you got your selector keys here, you've got all this stuff you need that's standard for doing all these records. One of the big things I love is going and hitting MX Toolbox. And I do this every time I modify an SPF record, because I will tell you the number of times I have gone and fat-fingered an SPF record and messed up email dozens of times. It's really easy to do. So I say it's really important to go after you're sure that change is propagated. Go and pull the record. This will give you information about the record, kind of parses it for you. Tells you right now we have a -all. You can change that record to be a squiggly line all, to be a little bit less authoritative. You can kind of decide how strong you want your SPF record to be. And this will kind of parse out what you have here in there. Let's look at another.
It also
domain.
checks for common errors, right? Like it also gives you evidence of common errors like recursion failures, DNS lookup failures in a hanging SPF record, things to that nature. It's pretty good at getting you,
or if you
that as well in those tools. Yeah, I love using it.
Or if you go over the 10 lookup limit.
Yeah, that's that recursion limit that I'm speaking of, right? That DNS recursion challenge. So.
Yep. Hey Dom, if you're talking to us, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
There he is. He came back, I think.
What? Oh.
Yeah.
Check. Did they mute me?
1, 2.
All your brilliant commentary was missed.
Yeah. No, I was just pointing out that this is valuable because I needed to do a tilde for an SPF record, which, by the way, I don't recommend. It means sort of, kind of, all. But we just needed it for this case.
Yeah.
And I did a backtick.
The soft
and I didn't
fail.
realize it for like a month until nothing worked. So backtick is not a valid SPF record.
It is
but it's
not
the
a
same
valid
damn
option
button on your keyboard.
Yeah. It's tilde or dash, right? Like, yeah. So that's it.
So we can see here. This is the PAX8 SPF record. I'm throwing you guys on screen here. You guys are using Valimail to flatten this, so I can't really see all the records here, which is not a bad thing.
It's great for OSINT
That's a really good way to go.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's great for OSINT protection, and if you'll notice there, this is interesting, Nathan, because what you're seeing there, those parentheses or those %H, IP %H. What that's actually telling, and this is a bit interesting thing, the way Valimail chose to approach this. What it's telling people is to use parts of the RFC for SPF to state, here's my IP, here's what I'm looking for, things to that nature that I can ask for based on where it's coming from. So one of the things they do is, like, if I say I need to send mail based on this, it goes, I'll tell them yes or no based on whether that matches, right? And so it's an interesting approach to it, but it does hide, and using any of those DMARC services does help hide some of your OSINT infrastructure, because it's happening in the transaction, not in the actual text record that's created for the SPF. Just side tangent. But.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We're going to go check another record here. DMARC lookup. Let's see what PAX8's DMARC is. So, and we'll dig into this a little bit now. So we can see that your public DMARC says if it doesn't pass DMARC, that you guys want it rejected and send the information to a Valimail aggregator. And so, if we go look at the DMARC record, there's a couple great articles about this, but they can actually be really long. You can get in here and you can get really subtle. You can start to say, you can send reportings to multiple locations. These codes here, these ADKIM, ADKIM, and ASPF allow you to say how strongly you're aligned on either SPF or DKIM. And this is all broken down in the standard, but you can really say, hey, my SPF's not great, so don't be as picky about that, but my DKIM is totally solid, so strictly adhere to DKIM. And you can really dial in some really subtle controls on that. As I mentioned, Google, Apple, and Yahoo are really starting to enforce DMARC. So if you don't even have a P = none, you're going to start getting emails rejected on some pretty big services going forward. So, there's some really important things to get after here as far as getting DMARC dialed in for yourself and all your customers. And you can see that here. They're saying it's required that you at least have a yes equals P = none to send email to Apple or Google recipients. So it's time to get this kind of dialed in if you haven't yet.
Which is really not all that hard, right? Because all you're really saying is, let it all through, right? Essentially, it's not even P = reject or P = quarantine. So I just want to let it land that all they're asking you to do is to know who's attacking you, pretending to be you, sending mail on your behalf, and not even really to do anything about it, because it's just going to go to some crap email box with no parsing, no reporting, and you're going to have nothing from it. So I just want to make sure people understand how low the bar really is. I don't want to be diminutive of it, but we act like it's a big thing, but it's really, really, really easy for most common mail providers in this case to get to that state. So, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about the next step then. So we talked about how every one of these records is a DNS record, right? This is all happening in DNS. Some of the next stuff we're going to talk about builds on top of DNSSEC. Matt, you want to take a run at defining what DNSSEC is, explaining it? 2 minutes?
Really, it's just trying to try to dumb this down. Is really just trying to use methodologies that already exist within how that domain exists in the root to say, yes, this DNS is actually the correct DNS for this domain, and it's ways to protect against that. Dom, do you want to add something to it just from the way it's signing it and those things at all?
Yeah, so I'll do two. So it's essentially there's a record called a DNS key, which is a whole new record type. Well, not new anymore, but it was anyways. You're essentially publishing either an RSA or ECDSA public key, and it's signing your zone file and the records within it. So it's the same concept as DKIM, and that it's hashing and then signing said hash with a private key that you can then deconstruct with a public key. And if you want to get like extra super nerdy about how the internet works, so like dot is a zone on the internet. It is the zone on the internet, like the root of the entire DNS infrastructure. And it is signed in every, I think it's quarter. There's a literal ceremony. It's like a 4-hour process. They run through procedures. You can actually go watch those it's the IANA quarterly or I'm sorry, it's the ICANN quarterly root zone ceremony.
Yes.
And you could see exactly how the whole internet is signed from a DNS perspective.
Awesome.
And I think DNSSEC solves a couple problems for us where it really it authenticates two things. It really authenticates whether the email came from somebody authoritative. They can check, sorry, not the email, but the DNS record, whether it's actually authentic. And
which is what sets the
from its
SPF
source.
record, which is what sets the selector record, which is what sets
Correct.
the, right? Yeah, so just to make sure we're on the same page there.
Correct.
Yep.
And then it also can validate the records. And the goal here is to eliminate man-in-the-middle attacks. There's a lot of high-profile attacks where if they can get a key DNS server, compromised, they can start sending back bad information. Whether that's your local DNS server or some provider's DNS server, they can do some pretty complex attacks by being able to poison, the cache on a DNS server or intercept that traffic. And by throwing DNSSEC in there, you give systems the ability to go and detect those attacks when they happen.
Yeah. The other thing that we want to bring up
DNS
here
at its core is
really
a UDP-based protocol, which was probably the goofiest decision in the history of the architecture of internet. But we don't need to go there. But if SMTP is like throwing a paper airplane into the ether, at least SMTP is going to tell you that it made it. UDP is just screaming into the abyss, and anyone that screams back is cool with me, right? Like that's UDP. So without it being signed, I could just intercept your unencrypted traffic, throw in a new zone file, and send it back, and you would never know.
And I'm not saying this stops that completely, but when we talk about other things that DNS have been a big part of, is that UDP nature creates the opportunity for the reflexive capabilities of that, right? So when you think about distributed denial of service attacks with reflexive capabilities, what they're doing is saying, hey, send me this really big zone file, back to your earlier point, Dom, and send it to me, my name is this. And because there's no handshaking or anything required, I could spoof being somebody else and ask that to be sent back to the victim, right? And so you could do that at a very large level. But the point being is it is always DNS. And the other thing I want to say is, everybody, we're talking about this being very complex. It is not hard to turn on. If you go to Cloudflare, turning on DNSSEC is fairly easy to enable. I know there are some challenges with it depending on your complexity, but if you're a common secretsquirrel.net, go ahead, Dom.
Oh, it's one switch in Cloudflare, assuming they're your
it's literally one
DNS.
switch. Look.
Yes. Well, and it actually keeps it. It also helps you with some stuff like, hey, one of your employees decides to move your zone to a different host, or it throws obstacles in the way of subdomain takeovers, and there's a lot of things it helps with. And what's going to help with another technology we'll get to in a second. But I think from our wrap up number one, we're going to kind of have two wrap ups here, but. I think from some takeaways, DMARC monitoring, you need a DMARC record, and it's pretty easy to set up monitoring. I have a big recommendation. You just back up your DNS config regularly, because I've definitely messed up SPF records and wanted to go back to what it was before. So make sure you're making backups. That monitoring is key for helping you understand who's sending it is you. Get DNSSEC running. If your provider doesn't support it, which there's a lot, maybe it's time to move your DNS off 2 cows and get it onto somebody like Cloudflare.
Oh, it's a throwback. Thank you.
Man, 2 cows.
I've seen it recently.
You're welcome. I know it's scary when you see it, but and then use your soft policies for testing. That P equals none or that soft fail on SPF. Right. You don't have to break stuff to test this out. So let's talk about some of the new stuff. We're going to dig into some new stuff, and then we'll go poke at some portals again. DANE for SMTP. This is some new functionality. What's interesting about what we've talked about so far is they were all for validating the email you're sending. DANE is really about validating emails getting sent to you. They know that they're sending it to the right person, because what it is it allows your email server, when the clients connect to it, to be authoritative about who's signing the TLS certificate that the email server is using. And so it's a way to confirm that the server they're sending to is actually you, which can eliminate, a very destructive man-in-the-middle attack where your email's going to the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah, if we think about it, it's like authenticating when the port 25 handshake is happening, because everything else we talked about is as it's meandered throughout the world, it gets here, and then I validate it yes or no as a client. You're speaking of as that SMTP server is receiving messages from that sending domain, it is now saying, I can validate whether this is actually true at that server level. That's why it's DANE for SMTP, correct? Is that the delineation?
Yes. Yes, it's a way for the person sending the email for the system sending the email to validate that it's actually sending to the correct email server, that the TLS certificate on it is valid. And so this is a much newer technology. It's one of a couple newer technologies that have been released. Microsoft supports it for outbound email already. It's enabled for everybody. Inbound email is coming, and so it's something to be aware of. And it's going to change.
In fact, if you read the article. If you read the article, it's been updated. It was supposed to be live March. It's now seeming to be large July. It seems. Is that right, Nathan? From what I saw in the article.
Yeah, and I would really expect that probably 2025 is we're going to see this start to deploy, because there's some tooling that they also haven't released for enabling this. But it's important to know it's out there. Big change that's coming with it is they are not enabling it on protection.outlook.com, which is what all AMX records are for Office 365 right now. You're going to have to change your MX record and your SPF to a random set of characters .mx.microsoft. They're using the .microsoft top-level domain, and they're tying all of this out to that. And part of the problem is they actually haven't enabled DNSSEC on the protection.outlook.com domain. And so they can't do this on that currently because they don't have DNSSEC enabled.
This also fixes another problem, Nathan, because one of the techniques that I can use to get a message to you is I can go get an Azure account, I can go get an Azure shell, and I can actually directly authenticate to a legacy PowerShell mail delivery service. This is actually courtesy of Black Hills Information Sec and Bo Bullock and team. But you can deliver a message that validly matches protection.outlook.com. It is within the SPF in that space. And so what it does is it bypasses, this would stop that, right? Because now with that DANE authentication, I don't have that originating signing for that subdomain that's being created in that DNSSEC that's then resultant thereof. So that is the point that this is going to stop a lot. So I just wanted to side tangent that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, anybody, but I believe that is going to be a big help for that.
There's a couple other technologies I'm going to buzz through here in interest of time. We're running out of time here, but MTA STS is another mechanism that's out there. It's a little harder to deploy. It requires you to publish some additional DNS records and some certificates. But what it does is it allows you for a server to not only validate their TLS records, but define them. These are the records I'm using.
Sure.
Google is engaged on this one. Microsoft will do it again on outbound email. On outbound email. On inbound email, it still takes a bit of work to get it set up. You've got to do some work to set it up. Couple other things to keep in mind. There's another feature, I mentioned it when we were in the 365 portal, trusted ARC sealers. You should be aware of this if you're using a third-party email filter like Proofpoint or one of those. And the issue is that your email is going through an intermediary server. Your email gets delivered to Proofpoint. They look at the email, they modify it, and then they send it off. Microsoft sees that. They're aware of that. And they say, hey, now that email doesn't pass DMARC. Trusted ARC sealers allows you to tell Microsoft who is allowed to look at your email, and then you still trust the SPF and the DMARC on it. So super valuable for those. That one's not hard. It's got a little wizard in the portal, and it's pretty straightforward. So
yeah, gotcha.
BIMI records, another one you're not going to see a lot of, but if you're a larger org, for orgs that send a lot of email, you got like a public-facing org. We service a customer that sends a couple million email a year to about 700,000 customers. You got to get your DMARC dialed in for customers like that. You got to make sure, because services like Amazon, Simple Mail Service will not allow you to use their service if you don't have your DMARC figured out. They'll literally block you as a customer if you're not dialing everything perfectly in. And BIMI record is another way to do that. And what it is you're adding an image to all your emails, and that image is cryptographically signed to a certificate. And so it validates your email as real through an image in the email. So it's another layer of authentication. A little more complicated to set up, but if you're public facing, it's a really valuable piece.
This is big, right? I imagine you're a Bank of America or a Microsoft or someone that wants to stop phishing. that is happening to someone representing them in ways that have gotten through a spam filters, missed settings, or whatever it may be, you could imagine this type of structure saying if the logo is broken and if it doesn't allow, then mail shouldn't be received is a very easy path to go through from a phishing prevention methodology for most of those phishing people, right? So this is just another method using that basically cryptographically protected image to do the same thing from a transport perspective, right? Of deny the mail.
Marketing thing in the broader like
Yes.
so in Outlook.com, it'll show you the BIMI image and like this message was signed because these certificates are org validated typically, so it's signed by
Yes.
Bank of America. They are expensive.
Yes.
But then that email
Yes.
in Outlook.com is going to say this email actually came from Bank of America or whatever that BIMI certificate is issued to.
And I think all of these layers come together in that like security's better when we've got layers, right? Think about being you're a spam filter, your phishing filter, and you're seeing thousands of emails a day. But every email from Pax8 has got a BIMI image. It matches DMARC. It's got SPF and DKIM alignment. It's signed. You've got MTA or DANE for SMTP, and you've got all these additional data points for your heuristics to see. And then an email comes in coming from an Azure email address, but it didn't check all the boxes. You're giving your email filter better data where it says, I can actually trust this provider's email more because it's consistently on point. And when something's out of whack, it's going to show up in those heuristics more often. So,
right.
All right. So let's let me buzz through these last two slides, and then we'll go poking a couple more portals. So,
that top
security implications.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about what the concern is on stale records and OSINT.
Yeah, just in the sense that you're going to give me information that your dev environment that you stopped using that A record that points to your local environment is still there, right? The other thing is there's domain takeover. Like we talked about DNSSEC. If you're still pointing to some service like some third-party hosting service that gives you a subdomain based on your domain, and you leave that and you stop and they eventually refresh it and I can sign in and actually start a new one, I could take over and emulate being you. I might be able to do things from that service that was already in an SPF, that was already in your capabilities and in your actual DNS and published. So like this goes back to that hygiene that we were talking about in the very beginning. And I just wanted to speak towards clean up after yourself. That's what it comes down to from that regard.
Especially
yeah,
DKIM. DKIM is a cryptographic key. It is mathematically proven beyond like the number of stars in the universe to a chance that that's you. And a lot of providers and platforms out there are lazy, and they'll cut a single DMARC key or DKIM key for their entire email base, which means if I can get it working, the DKIM key hasn't changed and whatever you published is valid. Now, good services issue one DKIM key per customer, but I don't know. Apparently, random numbers are expensive, so they don't.
Number.
It's important. It's important to go through and clean up your SPF record and your old DNS records. Another one that I think is critical. You gotta have MFA on your DNS, man. If I can get into your DNS, I have you.
Slam dunk.
I can make your life a nightmare. And it's one of those gaps. Like everybody's like, oh yeah, I've got MFA on my global admins at 365. But how about your DNS? How about your GoDaddy or Cloudflare accounts? Are those secure? It's critical.
Yeah. And are you hosting your client's DNS and that's not secure? Look at the implications from that from a risk perspective, right? From that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go pop open a couple portals. I know we're getting low on time here, but as Dom was alluding to, here in Cloudflare, DNSSEC is as easy as clicking that button and it's on. And now my domain is secured. They even have support for multi-signer DNSSEC. That means if you've got another DNS server, and you're like, hey, I want to delegate this out to a third party. They've got support for that, and we all love Cloudflare for so many reasons.
Ooh, that's a really important point. So if your domain's on Cloudflare and you flip on DNSSEC and you've got split domains for your or split DNS for like your internal AD domain or whatever, it's going to cause problems. So you need multi-signer and/or you can actually, and a lot of people don't know this, you can publish additional NS records. So corp.contoso.com can have entirely different authoritative DNS than your root domain.
Yes.
But keep an eye out, because if you flip on DNSSEC and you have a weird internal DNS thing happening, those will not validate.
Yeah, it's a good call out. And for the love of God, don't use your main internet domain for your Active Directory, because I die inside every time I find one.
Yeah.
That
Not
makes
wrong.
the
We've all been
hybridization
there.
so much easier. Anyways, I digress.
Yes. And like here, this is included with GoDaddy, with Cloudflare. This is free. They've got a basic
Their own
DMARC reporting
tool.
here. So it's really easy to go through here. I can go see who my sources are. In this case, this is my demo tenant, so it's just Microsoft. But you can see here that it's reporting on all the data here. It's that easy. If you're in Cloudflare, go check the box, publish the record. You're good to go. There's
And
some
they'll
really
give
cool
you the
checks
email
for
address in
DNSSEC.
that record. Right?
They
It
do.
makes it easy.
They do.
So, yeah.
There's a way to analyze your DNS security setup with, there's a couple services out there. This is one by VeriSign. You can go check if it's deployed, and this is valuable if you're trying to get DNSSEC dialed in. Sometimes third-party services don't get it fully there, and you got to understand why. So I was mentioning that DANE for SMTP is coming. As I mentioned, you can see here all of our email MX records are this protection.outlook.com. We're moving to a random character.mx.microsoft.com. So keep your eyes out for that. I think this is valuable to kind of at least understand and be ahead of. And Microsoft even has a tool for testing this. You can come here and you can go run a test on their remote connectivity analyzer, which is a totally underrated tool. And it's not going to work because it's not enabled yet, but they've got tools for going and checking this. So lots of great tools out there. Like I said, there's a lot of articles from Microsoft on SMTP DANE. There's articles about we talked about trusted ARC sealers, MTSTS. There's an article on Microsoft Learn here for how to adopt it if you'd like to go specify your SMTP servers. So lots of great stuff to kind of go help that. There's a lot of free tools there. So I think when we were prepping for this, Matt, you said, what's the one key thing? And I think it really boils down to DMARC, SPF, and DKIM are no longer optional. You have to be doing them, and your customers have to be doing them. You can't 100%. Skip it.
Yeah, and I think that's the takeaway, right? That's the one play today is, I'm such a nerd. All right, fair. You'll never know.
It's a UDP joke.
Anyways, you wouldn't get it. I'd tell it to you, but no guarantee you'd get it. But the point is like if you're not doing that for the first reason I said of this hygienic aspect of it and the actual threat actor view of your world aspect of it, open source intelligence world, all of the things. There's a lot of mistakes of our past that if you haven't cleaned them up, go clean them up. Like, do you really need to still be able to send mail from your office copier, to Nathan's point? Go deal with things to reduce that and get to where you can be secure. Because if not, it's going to stop being just some nerdy thing that might be for risk, and it's going to be my people can't send emails, I can't get stuff delivered, mail services are ignoring me, and it's really just not being the fastest, but being ahead of all the other people, right, is kind of the point. So yeah, one key thing.
Well, in the MSP space, our identity is critical, right? You can't play with it.
Yeah, it's massive.
All right, I think that's a mic drop moment from Nathan Taylor. So
that is a mic drop moment.
It's a perfect way to end the show. Is go get your stuff right, or you can't deliver your mail soon.
Nathan, thank you so much for joining us, and it's huge, right? We tend to think and forget about email, at least I do, because it's just paper airplanes at the end of the day. But it's getting harder and harder to move those paper airplanes around. So thanks so much for joining us. This was great, and that is our show for the week. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Let us know in the comments, what do you think of this Wednesday time? What do you think of this new format? What nerdy stuff do you want us to unpack next? We've got virtually infinite topics we get into now. I'm sure we can find someone for just about anything. But with that in mind, next week there is no guest, and we're actually working out some logistical stuff because Matt and I are on the same show. So you might get a pre-recorded show, you might get no show. We're gonna figure it out after this, but we will either see you next Wednesday or we won't. People will definitely see you in 2 Wednesdays. Don't forget to catch all the other PAX 8 shows. And believe it or not, I already have to talk PAX 8 Beyond again because it's already half sold out or something like that. So if you're interested in coming in 25, make sure you go take care of that. And we'll see you soon.